The lights inside the UN General Assembly Hall dimmed slightly as Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked to the podium. He was calm, focused, wearing his signature brown uniform, eyes fixed forward. Cameras clicked, journalists whispered. Everyone expected another speech about Africa's independence and dignity. But something was different. Behind him stood the tall flags of the world's most powerful nations. Traoré looked at the American flag for a long, uncomfortable moment. Too long. People started shifting in their seats. Then, without saying a word, he raised his arm and pointed directly at it. Silence. All you could hear was the quiet hum of cameras recording live across the globe. A few U.S. delegates stiffened. A general in the front row looked up curious. But Traoré didn't flinch. Then he did something no one expected. He closed his eyes. There was something in the air, a strange weight, a sadness no one could name yet. Even before he spoke, something told everyone. This was not going to be just a speech. This was a reckoning. A tear slowly formed in the eye of a retired soldier, watching from his hospital bed in Texas. And he had no idea why. Yet. Traoré opened his eyes. His voice, when it came, was steady, low, deep. He said, "That flag gave my father hope and took his life." The room gasped. Some turned to each other, confused. Others froze. A translator hesitated mid-sentence. Even the usually unshakable French ambassador blinked, stunned. Traoré didn't elaborate. Not yet. He just stood there, letting the silence carry the weight of his words. Back in a small house in Atlanta, a 9-year-old African-American boy watching with his grandmother whispered, "What does he mean?" His grandmother clutched his hand tighter and said nothing. Her eyes were locked on the screen. At the UN, no one moved. You could feel a chill, like the room had stopped breathing. Traoré continued, "My father believed in American freedom more than he believed in his own safety. He carried your promise in his pocket, while you carried him to his grave." Now even the toughest faces in the room softened. A U.S. veteran seated behind the French delegation lowered his head. But still, no one truly understood the full story. Why did Traoré's father trust America? How did it lead to his death? Everyone was desperate to know, and Traoré was just getting started. "My father," Traoré began slowly, "was not a soldier, not a politician, just a teacher, a village man." The massive screen behind him showed a faded photo, an old man smiling in front of a chalkboard, children barefoot and wide-eyed around him. In 2003, Traoré continued, the U.S. funded a peace partnership in our region. They gave radios, books, and promises. His father believed them. He taught his students about democracy, free speech, and the American dream. He told young boys in dusty villages that a man could rise if he worked hard and spoke the truth. But then, violence erupted nearby. Rebel groups backed by foreign interests. U.S. drones watched from the sky. Promises dried up. Support vanished. The radios stopped working. One day, Traoré's father was taken. By men in uniforms, no one knows whose. U.S. contractors were in the area, so were mercenaries. No one took responsibility. His body was found in the sand, bound, shot twice. He died holding a copy of the U.S. Constitution, Traoré said, voice cracking for the first time. He thought it could protect him. Now the soldier watching from Texas was crying. The little boy in Atlanta was holding back tears, and the world began to understand. This wasn't politics. This was personal. The photo changed again. Now it showed a tattered American flag, small, cloth, stained with red earth. "That's my father's flag," Traoré said. "He carried it in his chest pocket every day until the day he died." A sharp breath was heard in the hall. He stepped back from the microphone, giving the image space to speak for itself. "After they killed him, my uncle found this flag next to his body. It was soaked in blood and buried halfway in the dirt. Now the camera panned to the American delegation. Some looked down. One military attaché's hands were clenched in his lap. Traoré didn't accuse anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply told the story as it was, raw and quiet, and that's what made it hurt more. In a living room in Nebraska, a retired Marine sergeant who'd served in West Africa stood up from his recliner, walked to the window, and just stared out. He remembered the look in those village kids' eyes, the hope, the trust. Now it all made sense. This wasn't just about one man's death. It was about broken promises, and the flag that watched it all happen. Traoré paused. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small and folded. This is my father's last letter. He wrote it the night before he died. The room held its breath. The screen behind him zoomed in. The handwriting was shaky, written in French with smudged ink. Traoré began to read aloud, translating softly into English. If I do not return, tell my son I still believe in good people. Tell him to carry truth like I carried this flag, not to hate, not to forget, and not to let my death be wasted. The room went still. A woman in the U.S. delegation quietly wiped her cheek. Then Traoré looked up, right into the camera lens. He died believing in your values, even after you abandoned him. The tension was unbearable now. Viewers online flooded the live stream with crying emojis. I'm sobbing, wrote one. Why am I shaking? Typed another. Somewhere in Oklahoma, a young teacher paused the video and sat in silence for 10 whole minutes. She thought about her own students, how easily truth can be turned into dust, and how powerful it is when someone dares to dig it back up. As Traoré stepped away from the podium, the press area exploded with movement. Hands shot into the air. Reporters were desperate to ask questions. CNN, Al Jazeera, France 24, BBC, Fox News. But it was a young American reporter, Rachel Torres from a small Texas outlet, who was handed the mic. Her voice trembled. Mr. Traoré, if your father still believed in America despite what happened, do you? The room turned silent again. Everyone waited for him to lash out, to condemn, to say what most men would. But Traoré just looked at her, softly, and said, I believe in the people, not the power. Rachel's eyes welled up. Just a year earlier, she'd written an op-ed calling Traoré a radical populist with anti-Western rhetoric. Now, standing in front of him, she felt ashamed. I'm sorry, she whispered. Traoré nodded. Don't be. Just write the truth now. That one exchange went viral in hours, but the full story wasn't out yet. Because what came next, what Traoré revealed about the last promise his father made, would leave even the strongest people sobbing, and change the way millions viewed the U.S. forever. After the session ended, cameras followed Traoré quietly exiting the hall. But before leaving, he stopped beside a U.S. Marine veteran seated in a wheelchair near the back. The man was crying, silently, uncontrollably. Traoré bent down and placed something in the man's hand. A paper. Fragile. Old. It was a copy of the last promise he made to his father. He turned to the cameras and said, My father asked me to give this to a soldier one day. Not a president, not a politician. A soldier. Everyone leaned in as the cameras zoomed in on the note. It read, To the one who wears the uniform, you may not know my name, but I believed in you. I forgave you before you even came. The Marine, a Gulf War veteran named Thomas, looked up with red eyes and whispered, I've waited 20 years to hear that. Traoré held his hand and said, Then it was meant for you. The clip went viral in minutes. That simple note, written by a dying African father and delivered decades later to an aging U.S. soldier, became a symbol of forgiveness the world never expected. And yet, the story still wasn't over. That night, CNN ran a special segment, The Desert That Remembered. It featured exclusive drone footage from the Sahel, the dry, war-torn region Traoré's father had once traveled through as a teacher. The camera showed the sand, the dust, and a lone marker, a wooden post stuck into the earth. It read in English and French, "Here lies a believer, not in power, but in peace." The world learned that Traoré had returned to the spot years earlier, alone, no bodyguards, no press. He planted the post himself. The reporter's voice cracked as she explained how the place had become a local shrine. Villagers walked hours just to touch the wood, whisper prayers, or place a single stone in tribute. They weren't mourning a death. They were honoring a truth that wouldn't stay buried. One U.S. soldier watching from Germany said, "I've been deployed 3 times. That's the first time I cried over someone I never met." Meanwhile, in a Brooklyn apartment, a young African-American student started writing a school essay titled, "The Man Who Pointed at a Flag and Changed the World." And still, the world didn't know what Traoré had planned next. 3 days later, Ibrahim Traoré showed up unexpectedly at an elementary school in Washington, D.C. No press, just one camera phone held by a teacher. He stepped into a classroom of 4th graders, half of them African American, some Latino, others white, and asked, "Do you know what that flag means?" The kids looked up, unsure. One little girl raised her hand and said, "It means freedom?" Traoré nodded slowly. "Yes, but only if everyone gets it." Then he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of his father's teaching chalkboard. Broken, faded, wrapped in a cloth. He placed it on the teacher's desk and said, "This was my father's." He paused, then added, "He died believing that one day, a classroom in America would understand that the world isn't divided by flags, it's united by hearts." The children clapped. One boy started to cry and didn't know why. The teacher hugged Traoré as she whispered, "This is going to stay with them forever." And across social media, the video took off. Millions were crying now, not out of anger, but out of healing. But the most unforgettable moment still hadn't arrived. At a quiet memorial event near Arlington National Cemetery, a woman stood in the crowd holding a single rose. She wasn't American. She had flown in from Ouagadougou just days before. Her name was Ibrahim Traoré, Ibrahim's mother. The crowd didn't notice her at first, not until Ibrahim stepped down from the podium, walked straight to her, and knelt at her feet. "She is the one who carried both me and my father's legacy," he said into the microphone. "She buried the man who believed in your flag, and raised the boy who had to stand in front of it." Gasps. Some started to cry before they even understood why. Mariam placed the rose on a small stone Ibrahim had laid earlier. It bore no name, just a date. The day his father died. "I didn't come here to blame," she whispered in French, her voice cracking. "I came to forgive." A young soldier behind the ropes sobbed openly. For a moment, the cameras didn't matter. The microphones didn't matter. It was just a mother, a son, and a silence that carried generations of pain. And something inside America, something deep and buried, began to shift. The next morning, in a televised ceremony that no one had prepared for, something happened that history would remember forever. As the U.S. flag flew high outside the Capitol, a uniformed U.S. officer stepped forward, holding a tri-folded American flag, the same kind given to fallen soldiers' families. He placed it in Traoré's hands. "I don't speak for the government," the officer said, "but I served. I was there, and I failed your father." A hush fell over the crowd. Traoré didn't speak. He just stared at the flag, and then slowly turned toward the American people watching on screens across the world. Then he said, This doesn't fix the past, but maybe it starts to fix the future. The officer, tears streaming down his face, saluted. In that single moment, the flag that once lay in the dirt beside his father's body was returned, not as a symbol of betrayal, but of reckoning. Every major network played the clip. Headlines read, "From dust to honor, America returns what it once took." And still, Ibrahim Traoré hadn't delivered the final message he came to share. The sentence that would change everything hadn't been spoken yet. It was evening. The sun dipped low behind the Lincoln Memorial as Traoré stepped up one last time, surrounded by a diverse crowd: students, veterans, mothers, diplomats, children. He stood in front of the flag again, the same one from the UN hall. This time he didn't point at it. He stood beside it, and he said, "If a flag only stands for the powerful, then it is just fabric. But if it can also shelter the forgotten, then it becomes a soul." That was it. The sentence. The one that brought thousands in the crowd to their knees. The one that made even critics go silent. The one that finally explained everything he carried in his heart. People sobbed openly. A woman live streaming in Detroit dropped her phone from shaking. In South Africa, a child watched the clip and asked his mother, "Can a flag have a soul?" The internet exploded. The sentence was printed on murals, shared by veterans, engraved into protest signs, and spoken in classrooms across continents. It wasn't about Africa versus America anymore. It was about remembering the people forgotten beneath flags. And finally, the world was listening. The sentence, "If a flag only stands for the powerful, then it is just fabric," echoed across the world. But its deepest impact was felt in the very place his father loved most: a classroom. In a public school in Minneapolis, a fifth-grade teacher played the clip during a lesson on global leadership. Some kids were restless. A few didn't understand the full weight of it, until one girl, Anna, raised her hand. "My dad was deported last year," she said quietly. "He also believed in that flag." The room froze. Then another student, a boy from Ghana, said, "My uncle died in a war America didn't even finish." The teacher couldn't speak. Her eyes filled with tears. It started as a normal school day, but by the time the video ended, even the class clown was sobbing. They weren't crying for Traoré. They were crying because someone finally said out loud what they had always felt: that promises only matter when they're honored, not just written. Somewhere in the back of the room, a small hand raised. "I want to be like him," the child said. And for the first time in weeks, the teacher smiled through her tears. In a veterans care center outside Chicago, an old man watched the replay for the third time that night. His name was Harold, a Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart, once proud, once certain. But tonight he was different. He couldn't move his legs anymore. Age, time, and memory had worn him down. But when Traoré said that sentence, Harold whispered, "That's what I've been trying to say for 50 years. His nurse, a woman from Mali, gently touched his hand. Harold stared at the screen. "I killed men who looked like him. I never knew their names, never knew their stories. I thought I was protecting freedom. But maybe I was just protecting fabric." He began to cry, silent, slow, soul-deep tears. "I don't want to die thinking I was wrong." The nurse leaned in, her voice soft. "Maybe you don't have to. Maybe you just needed someone brave enough to tell the truth." Harold closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, his breathing slowed. Not from pain, but from peace. Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just given speeches. He gave people like Harold something to hold before the end. Back in Burkina Faso, a dusty drawer was opened for the first time in years. Inside was an envelope, faded, unsealed, fragile, addressed to the people of the United States of America. It was written by Traoré's father just months before his death. Ibrahim had never shown it publicly until now. He posted the scanned letter online with one caption. He never mailed it, but maybe it's not too late. The letter read, "Dear Americans, you may never know me, but I taught my children to believe in your ideals. I spoke of your Constitution like scripture. I prayed that my son would grow up not hating your country, but helping it remember what it once promised." The post broke the internet. Celebrities shared it. Soldiers reshared it. Teachers printed it. Even former critics of Traoré fell silent, because it wasn't written with blame. It was written with hope, the kind that survives bullets, betrayal, and time, the kind that only fathers write. And now, the world was reading it together, word by word, tear by tear. A week after Traoré's speech, a video surfaced, grainy, shaky, taken on a phone. It showed Ibrahim Traoré walking through Dulles International Airport, heading toward his flight back to Burkina Faso. No security, no press team. Then it happened. A young African-American boy, maybe 12, ran toward him, weaving through the crowd. A woman behind him shouted, "Jaden, wait!" The boy didn't stop. He threw his arms around Traoré's waist and held him tight. He was shaking. "I saw you on TV," the boy cried. "My dad's in prison. But you made me feel like he's still a good man." Traoré knelt, placed both hands on the boy's shoulders, and said softly, "Then you carry his light now. Make it shine even brighter." The boy nodded, wiping his tears. His mother caught up, crying too. She whispered, "You changed my son." By morning, the clip had millions of views, because this wasn't a political leader in a suit. It was a man who carried grief, love, and forgiveness, and gave it to a child in need. A moment so small, yet bigger than any headline. Weeks passed. Traoré was back in Burkina Faso, working, rebuilding, inspiring. But one photo would bring the story full circle. A quiet memorial was held in Washington. Dozens gathered. Teachers, veterans, immigrants, children. In the center of the room was a simple wooden chair. On the seat, a folded flag, a chalkboard scrap. A copy of the letter Traoré's father never mailed. No one spoke. Not for a while. Then a student stepped forward and placed a handmade sign beside the chair. It read, "This is not an empty seat. This is a seat for truth." People cried, real tears, soulful ones. Because this wasn't just a story anymore. It was a wound shared and a healing beginning. Somewhere in a small town, a grandmother wiped her face and said, "That African boy made my whole heart remember what kindness feels like." And people across the world, from Ghana to Detroit, from Paris to Ouagadougou, felt a strange new hope. Maybe the world wasn't as broken as they thought. Maybe it was just waiting for voices like his. Back in his home village under a full moon, Traoré stood at the same spot where his father once taught barefoot children how to dream. Beside him, the tattered U.S. flag his father carried, washed, folded, clean. He raised it, not out of anger, not in surrender, but in memory. He looked at the stars and whispered, "You died believing this flag could mean something. I still believe it too. But now, the world believes with me." As the camera pulled back, the children around him lifted handmade flags, some from Burkina Faso, some American, some with no nation at all. Just colors, just hearts. Because in that moment, flags weren't fabric anymore. They were memories, wounds, dreams, forgiveness. And Ibrahim Traoré had reminded the world, it's not the colors on the flag that matter, it's the people who bleed beneath them. If your eyes are wet and your heart is heavy, you're not alone. If this story made you feel something deep inside, if it reminded you of a loved one, a forgotten truth, or a part of yourself you've buried,
Then do one thing before you leave. Like this video to honor all the fathers, mothers, soldiers, teachers, and children the world forgets. Comment below with a single word: truth. Because sometimes truth is all we need to feel human again. Subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, not erased. And remember, flags fade, but hearts don't. Let's keep this story alive, together.